From the 5 boroughs of New York to the shores of Chi-Town, from Cleveland, Ohio to Las Vegas, Nevada, let's ride. We want to ride shotgun with you for the next hour, talking trucking with Deaton and Doty. How's it going, everyone?
Doing fantastic.
Nice.
Yeah. Well, today on Talkin Truckin, we will talk a little bit about fuel mileage. Ray's with us, Jim Mackey, Nate, and Kevin. Ray, where are you at? You're at home in San Antonio, right?
I'm at home, yes, sir.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Surprise. That's, jeez.
Yeah, he just
It's been
got
a month.
home. He has been out for a little while. So, in his defense, the floaty has not been in the pool lately. Jim Mackey, where are you at?
I am just outside of Shreveport, Louisiana right now.
And Nate, where are you at?
I am in Hotlanta.
Hotlanta. Is it hot?
Not currently. It's a little
No.
rainy.
Yeah.
Slow at 285.
This has been one of the warmest days we've had since last summer, right, guys? It's like 60 degrees,
Pretty much.
sun shining. Can't believe it. All the snow melted.
Rains on the weekend.
Kevin's at the port. He said he'll be out in a minute, and he will join us. Christian Sneed from Roanoke is with us. Mike Doty, the original Florida man. And Joel Howell. On our producer, Zach Kern. On the news, Ian Dunlap. And, as always, the famous Kumar.
Hello. Kumar.
So,
MMA.
fuel prices have been skyrocketing everywhere you go. I'm sure drivers, when you see it, we're seeing it. We're just around town here in Ohio at the pumps on regular gas. How is it down there in Florida, Mike? Pretty high?
Same thing, yeah.
Same thing,
So
yeah.
it's like everywhere else.
Yeah. So when fuel goes up like this, the first question we've had drivers asking is, why isn't the rates going up? And Christian brought this up probably a year ago on the show, or close to a year ago. And he's right. The price of freight isn't based on the price of a barrel of oil. The price of freight is supply and demand, and among a few other things. And you know, we might see it go up and follow it a little bit, but it's not. The price of freight isn't dictated by the barrel of oil, right, Christian?
That's correct.
So I've said that over and over and over in the last week. We do the best we can with the price of freight. Mike, what were some of the things you were talking about with fuel and fuel mileage, and what would you do right now in this situation when you were in the truck? What were you doing?
Right now in this situation, the first thing I do is slow down. Like with my guys, if they call me up complaining about fuel prices, the first thing I'm going to do is look at how
Their
fast
speed.
they've been going.
Yeah.
And if they're going 75 everywhere still, we're not having the conversation. It's
Yeah.
over right there. I'm not going to go into it with you, because all you have to do to gain a couple $100 in your pocket every week is slow down like you're driving a prime truck. I mean, it sucks, but it'll put extra money in your pocket, that's for sure, and it won't go into the fuel tank. I mean, that's a guarantee.
Right.
That's first, and then maybe you got to switch things up a little bit. Go get out of your comfort zone, run maybe where you wouldn't normally run. Try to get some shorter miles in for some better rate per mile.
We talked about that, Mike, you and I, about maybe running a little shorter, per day, and rather than longer, and because if you can run shorter miles and get a decent amount of money per day, you're going to spend less in fuel that way too.
Yeah, and there's a fine line there too.
Right.
I tried to do the math, where you hit a place where you can do short miles and make the same money as if you ran long miles but did more revenue. But then there's that tipping point where you go over a certain amount of gross, where you start putting more money into your pocket. But I don't know where that number is. I haven't figured it out yet, where that tipping point is versus short miles.
I have a
long.
And Mike, I have a calculator I'll put on next week because it does, and it assumes that you get 100% of fuel surcharge. Because at some point there's an exchange on the tail end. It's like a bullet, the ballistics, right? There's a trajectory where you have to go up, and you have to have a big enough gross, and it comes back down. But that exchange is the same because you get 100% of fuel. So there is a number of miles that has that. I'll bring that up next week.
And Henry Albert said it best, I think, when he said, I go as fast as I need to go to get where I'm going.
Yeah.
So what's the point of going 75 miles an hour to get to your shipper and go to sleep to deliver in the morning? It doesn't make any sense. So,
and then that's another thing too, is just going back, maybe go back to that show and listen to the few things that he did. The few little things to his truck and trailer might only add a tenth of a mile per gallon, but 5 of those things,
that's right.
is now that's a half a mile to the gallon. Now that's $100 a week at fuel prices, or 150 a week or whatever the case is. But it adds up, every little thing. Like, what did he say? The license plate holder on the back of the trailer, at like a tenth of a mile per gallon or something like that, or and every little thing, the gap. And I know, it's everyone's not like him. Everyone can't close the gap on the trailer in a day. You know what I mean? In a day, and change their mud flap or change their license plate holder. Right. But the things you can do, you can slow down. You can travel outside of your comfort zone a little bit to find better rates. You can, use your time wisely, man. If you're down for whatever reason, if you got to wait to deliver a load and you need to get maintenance done on your truck, get it done while you're down. Don't sit around waiting to deliver the load, and then be down for another day or two because you got to get an oil change or do maintenance. Try to get that done. Anytime I had to wait for anything, I was always trying to do something, knock something out, so I
be
wasn't
efficient
down later on.
That's what we did today.
Ray, how fast do you normally go, Ray? Because I know you've always done it like this. If you're not hard pressed to get somewhere, Ray, what are you usually running? What speed?
Right. Lately, my average has been around 67, 68, but there's been a few reasons for that. Driving West Coast, I mean, usually I'm kind of up and down mountains and stuff like that, so you kind of get an average of what you're rolling down these hills or whatever, using that for my benefit. But if on straight ground, flat ground, I normally run around 63, 64. That's about my average, and I seem to get pretty decent fuel mileage right there.
And even when fuel wasn't high, and we're talking, for years, Ray's been running like that on our fleet. And he gets probably one of the best fuel miles. He has the least amount of fuel spent per week. Not the least, but he's up there every week, week in, week out, year in, year out.
And see, so for someone like him, he's going to notice it a little more because he's already been doing that, right? So he's going to feel the sting a little bit more with these fuel prices, whereas somebody that's always running 75, now fuel prices go up. If they slow down, they're saving that money that Ray's already there,
right.
But they see more in their pocket versus just
they'll see double because. Here's where they'll see double. They'll see, okay, I slowed it down, so I'm saving a little there. But also the fuel surcharge went up to this week 77 cents a mile. 3 weeks ago, Christian, what was it, 52?
47 or 50,
40. It was, around 50
40s.
cents.
Yep.
So now we're up 27, 28 cents, maybe almost 30 cents a mile in fuel surcharge. So coupled with the slowing down and then the more money and the fuel surcharge, the guy that was going 75 and kicks it back into the mid to low 60s is going to really see the benefit, whereas Ray is just going to see that difference because the fuel surcharge is high.
Right, because he's already
there
and doing And then another one is the fuel. If you don't have it, the Fuel Book app, you can put your route in there and it'll show you the cheapest fuel prices that accept our fuel cards, Comdata or whichever one you have. It'll show you the cheapest price to fuel. And then I know some of my guys do this, and I try to get them out of the habit, and I don't know really why, but they try to just buy fuel for that load, right? Like, so they see, okay, I get 500.
That's the worst you can do.
I know, $500 on this load for fuel, so they'll just put $500 in or $600, whatever they need to run that load,
and try and get beat
to try to match the fuel to the load. Right now, just fuel. You got to pay for fuel no matter what. It's the number one thing you're going to need to run the truck, right? So just fuel where it's cheaper and fill up.
I would say unless you're going home. I'd say if you're going home and you need that paycheck going in to pay bills going into the house as opposed to coming out, That's the only exception that I
Yeah.
can say.
Wait.
Yeah, I work a little bit different because Christian, because whenever I come home, this is the way I look at it. I gotta have enough fuel to come out of the house and deadhead to Laredo. That way I don't have to fuel up until after I'm coming back. So I'll carry enough fuel before I even come home, and that way, a lot of times whenever I leave the house, they'll just say, Russell, especially, hey, just go to Laredo. I'll have you a load by the time you get there. So I may not be under a load, so I can't fuel up if I'm not under a load. So I know I gotta have enough fuel to get there and come back. So that's the way I do it. But Doty, if you don't mind, one of the things I was gonna say too is that advice on drivers who are only fueling up for the load. In the long run, they're going to pay much more money that way. The only time I would actually give that advice is if you got a new driver that's broke and he has no money and you're trying to maximize your weekly paycheck. After you've built up enough money, hey, that should be the least of your worries. You should be fueling up at the best price no matter what.
And filling up. And if you need the money going into the house to pay bills, just get what you need to get home. But realize right now, the way fuel prices are, you might come out of the house and it might be 50 cents more a gallon.
Yeah, you're right.
So, just keep that in mind.
Like when Jim Mackey went to sleep and decided not to fuel.
Exactly.
Woke up and
20 cents a gallon. That's what made me think
that
of
was a big gamble right there.
Yeah.
That's happened more than once.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of the stuff just seems like common sense, but you just got to apply it. I know it was hard for me, and I very rarely did it to go 65 or 63. I know, but
I feel you on that too, because when Joel and I were on the road and fuel prices jumped up and rates were like $1 something a mile. It was $1.25 or whatever we were running freight for. And Joel would drive 55, and I was going about 60, 62.
That wasn't that bad. Come on.
What year was that?
He was
pretty
slow.
bad, though. Causing a log jam.
But you know what? It's so hard to slow it down, but it was the only way we could make money. And we weren't killing it. We were making a living, and we got through times.
What year was that?
I'm not really sure. Probably 2010, 11, somewhere in there. But, that's where just making that sacrifice and slowing it down a little bit. I mean, it's not that bad. You get used to it. I mean,
no, you just set the cruise, especially on the highways. You set the cruise and
roll.
Let people blow by you or whatever. And
the other thing, Mike, is not stopping so much.
That is
huge, because you lose a lot of fuel every time you got to get back up to speed and getting pulling into a truck stop and parking and then leaving and getting back out there. If you can run your shift and plan accordingly, where you only have to stop once, maybe twice, maybe once for your half-hour break, and then once maybe, for your own break if you need to go to the bathroom or something. I mean, that's
top of the hill.
That's probably the most I would stop when I was driving is twice. Usually I tried to. Usually I tried to. Yeah.
So if you gotta go to the bathroom, stop at the top of the hill. That way, whenever you take off, you just roll downhill.
Yeah. Joel and I remember.
I kind of enjoy looking at the right side of the truck once in a while.
Yeah. I mean, we would stop. It was before the half-hour break, so we didn't have to stop. And there were times, I said on the show before, we were solo driving, but we were competing with who could put the most miles up in an 11-hour shift, and literally pulling into a spot with a minute left and trying to beat each other because we were competitive. Yeah. But that was, I mean, a lot of those trips, Joel, those days we weren't stopping, were we? No. We were just rolling, and I'm not saying that's safe. I mean, I know I learned later you need to get out and stretch your legs, but I tried to split my shift up. It was before a half-hour break. And, every 5 hours or so, take a break, walk around the truck, get your blood flowing, use the restroom, and then get back on the road. But stopping every 2-3 hours, that's going to kill your fuel mileage too.
Yeah, so I have another aspect too of on fuel mileage, and this is the way I look at it. I mean, me, I really don't like to run a lot of West Coast, West, Northwest, or whatever. There's 3 factors that I find that are really bad for your fuel mileage up there. 1, you got high fuel prices. 2, you got mountains, and 3, you have really, really high winds, and a lot of people don't understand how much wind affects your fuel mileage.
Especially a headwind when it's coming at you.
Yeah, especially if you're headwind. If you're in the majority of the time, if you're headed west, you're gonna have a headwind. And sometimes when you're headed east, you'll have that tailwind to push you, and that helps. But over the the time that you're going out west, you're going to deal with those high fuel prices. You're going to deal with the mountains, and you're going to deal with a lot of wind, which really kills your fuel mileage.
And usually a lot of weight.
Yeah, and my truck is, and like I said in one of our previous shows, my truck is not the best geared truck, for dealing with those mountains, and my fuel mileage goes through the floor every time I go that way.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and we're not, look, man, we can't solve the price of oil on this show. We just can't. It's not going to happen. But we're just kind of throwing out ideas that can help you, offset it on the things that you can control. And, these are some of the things I know Henry Albert went over them. Like he said, hold a CB antenna outside your window while you're going 60 or 65 down the road and see how your arm feels at the end of a few hours or all day. There is resistance there in that wind, and any little thing that you can think of that you can control on your truck that's gonna deflect wind. Try and take a look at those if you're able to. If not, just do the things that are in your control, like slow it down and stuff like that. What do you think, Christian? You had some information last week.
Yeah, I do. I'll
fuel
screen
mileage. You
share
want to go
real
over
quick here. Boom! You should be looking at my screen now.
Episode 48.
There you go.
48.
About a year in.
So I just brought up, I know you said it's not based all off of crude oil. This is how they say all the prices are calculated, which we know speculation and the market of supply and demand drives a lot of that as well. This is what the Department of Energy Information Analysis puts out, and it puts out every week, except for the time that we shut the government down, that they didn't update it. But it shows that a year ago it was $1.70 less than it is today. And I'm going to touch on that for a year ago, because we're going to get back to that in just a minute on how we performed from December to March last year. However, go ahead.
So the price at the pump
Yep.
of diesel was $1.70 less than it is today.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Yep, and that was on average. And this information, you usually think a week is not old information, but I prepared this last week for the week prior, so it's obviously the numbers are a little off. This number is probably going to jump just a cent or two anyways. But from a week ago, the fuel pump change, the price of fuel at the pump changed 74.5 cents. And that's when, there were a lot of panic buttons being hit.
Right.
And obviously that depends on, where you're at in the country, depending on what the average is going to be. Now, if you look up the internet's definition of fuel surcharge, you'll get this, and you can read it and you can look at it. I don't pay attention to it, because ultimately, generally what we look at is what is it that our contracts are built on, and what is it that we're looking at when we're in the spot market. And some of those are spot freights that come out of a contract with a broker, with a particular shipper, or a series of 3PLs with shippers. And some of it's just spot freight, just whatever the seasonal price of freight is going for. But generally speaking, and we bring this up because guys, especially with Metal Arc fleet and our fleet, they end up having 100% of fuel surcharge. There are companies that are local here in Roanoke that don't pay you 100% of fuel surcharge. But the way we look at that is your money, that when price of fuel changes, that's your money that changes at the pump. And so what this tells you is that generally it's built upon about a base price of $1.26. HP Hood and Coca-Cola, they can vary basically on what the base price is, but fundamentally it's about every 5 cents that it increases at the pump from their base rate, that there'd be a 1 cent per mile increase for the freight rate. So if you see the pump go up 20 cents at the pump, it's 4 cents per mile. And that calculation was done years ago when we had a lot less efficient trucks. So if Ray's running 7.5 or 8 miles per gallon, he's going to benefit much more off this fuel surcharge program than someone that's running 5 or 5.5. Because the larger the fuel surcharge, the larger of Ray's, the higher fuel goes, the more Ray's going to put 100% in his pocket, and his truck's going to be running way more efficient than a 6 mile per gallon truck. It make sense?
Yeah. So when he's getting that 7.5, that's what you're talking about, where he'll
7.5.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. And that still beats somebody getting 5.5 or 6 in a 60 series Detroit, or 6.5.
Right.
So some things that we know, right? The first thing is relax. It's all going to be okay. A lot of times we kind of like look for the diaper to fill up before it has. And what we do is we cause more damage. And that happens because in a reactionary market, and that's what we found out. Did you guys notice how rates did not affect go with fuel as well as they should have the beginning of last week? It's because there are, and part of that, right? And you can look at tonnage, you can look at how many shipments are moving, but ultimately, if we're there and we're nervous, we're not going to move for the rate we need to that day. We're going to take that piece of freight. And what happens? Then freight starts leaving the board at a certain rate and a certain pace. as opposed to holding your ground, right? It's kind of like Braveheart. We have to hold, right? We have to hold for a while.
Right.
And so this way we don't become as reactive, because when we react emotionally, what happens is it puts our bargaining chip right back over to the brokers and the shippers. Let's think about it. There's not enough trucks to move freight, and there's more freight than there is trucks. So we're in control, right? Supply and demand would generally tell you that we get to indicate what the market does. And this is identical. Mike, we should have got together before the show, but Mike is absolutely right. Behaviors drive miles per gallon. It's so frustrating to have somebody say, man, I'm getting killed on fuel. And I spent $25, $28, $30, $200 in fuel this week. I'm going to say, okay, let's pull up your ELD. I'm going to ask you how fast you've been driving, and did you need to get there that fast, right? And the guy's going 76 miles an hour, 75 miles an hour, and he's there 7 hours ahead of time and just idling the truck at a truck stop.
Makes no sense.
No, he's tossing hundreds of dollars a week out the window. Second is, if you're not an automatic truck, progressively shift, right? And Henry talked on some of that on shifting before you maximize your RPMs. As he said, it may sound cooler, but the only thing you're doing is pouring fuel out the exhaust pipe. The other thing is the weight of the loads. It might be the difference between 6.5 to 7.2 miles to the gallon if you're pulling a 25,000 pound load as opposed to 43. Open your map up. I mean, Mike, I'm just repeating you. And then, mileage, a shorter run versus longer runs when it makes sense, and you can still capitalize on gross margin. So we're going to cover a couple things here. One is fuel. I'll cover the historical changes since 1994. One is we can talk about the lessons between today and 2008. So 2008, we saw similar fuel prices outside of the last week. Excuse me. The difference is we have freight to carry. Russ, when you were talking about like 2010 or 11, you'll see it was like 350 going into fours again. Yeah. And freight wasn't there. We have freight now. If we don't allow current events and that firewall that's always being prodded from 3PLs and customers, then we'll hold the market together. But if we don't, and people start moving freight, and carriers, the worst thing a carrier can do is cut his rate, because he's not just cutting his rate, but he's also cutting my rate.
Right.
So in 2008, we didn't have the freight that we do today. And then let's talk about the differences between today, where we're at today, and the market. And we will here in a minute. I'll give a comparison as opposed to last year. It's like 20 episodes, 30 episodes ago, I covered what the fuel was in January, February, March, the first 3 months under the Biden administration, so to speak, and then what our freight rates did. And we were all happy then. We said, man, we're making more money than we ever have. Our cent per mile is higher. The facts are DAT's average cent per mile did not keep up with the rising cost of fuel month over month. So we felt better about it because we were not making.
Christian, I remember that. You said that on that episode.
Yes, and we're going to find that since then we've kicked everybody's tail, right? And now it's just started. They've started to get a little bit back, but I don't think it's going to stay there. We're going into a warm market. Flatbeds starting to open up. Fuel prices always go up this time of year, but we never care as we're going in the next 2 months. It generally goes up as seasonal fuel exchanges and things like that. We go into Memorial Day and all the way through Labor Day, but we don't care because freight rates are up. Well, that should, unless there's an economic downfall, that should happen again. But we have been running and far exceeding the market increase since the first quarter. So we'll also review fuel surcharge month over month since April of last year. We'll review month over month changes, and then also the trends. So similar to how an insurance broker wants to have multiple tentacles of insurance coming in, so the broader the pool, the less liability, we're also going to look at that over trend. So I did a 2-month trend on the graph. And then lastly, why is fuel important? So why is fuel surcharge so important? Because we get 100% of it. We get 100% of fuel surcharge. So when it goes up at the pump, it is automatically adjusted in your settlement. So this is why we say relax, because even if you're not making the same gross money, right, you're still having a larger percentage of that money flowed to you. So whether you're at a Landstar making 65 or you're somewhere else making 75, the 100% of the fuel surcharge goes to you. And I'd rather take a 50% of 100 than 100% of zero. So
yeah, and we don't know. There's a lot of drivers that aren't on Deaton or Dawson fleets, so I don't know if they're getting 100% of the fuel. But I think, Christian, you're speaking of our fleets.
Yes, of our fleets, so absolutely.
They do get 100% of it.
They do, and there's some locally here in Roanoke that don't, and they are getting squeezed right now because they're paying at the pump, and they're not getting it back in their paychecks. Right. Our settlements this week were larger, and a majority of settlements were larger this week than the week before, and last week than the week before that, because our offices are working harder to move them. We're making more phone calls, and guys are actually know that they're out there working. Now, the guys that go home are paying for it twice as much because their truck and trailer's still not there. When they come out and fuel up, they're seeing it.
Right.
So the first thing we'll look at history, right? Because we don't want it to repeat ourselves. Now we are freaking out here as we end up getting December into March over $4. But it's not like we haven't seen it before. Right here in the middle, this is right where you're talking. 2010, 2011, when fuel was going up, Russ, this is what you're talking about. So we've seen it over $4 before.
But the volume of freight, like you said, it wasn't there. And, and the price was cheap.
And let's roll back a couple months, a year or two before that, in 2008. Now, that was atrocious. I mean, we were putting, glass inside of motors for recycling. We were creating all sorts of part-time jobs. Coca-Cola was cutting things because of how health benefits were rolling out in this 3-year period. So it was really hard to have consistent freight. And companies were so scared because of a lot of other changes that were taking place economically.
Yeah.
Market confidence was down. But now we're here. So we're about, we're at the peak now, but we're about where this peak was going. And we have all of the freight in the world that we currently want. But you have to look at the markets and stay in there. Like Mike said earlier, if you're used to running the Southeast, well, open your imagination and your pocketbook will open along with it. So let's look at fuel surcharge alone. This is from April of last year, moving all the way to February of this year. And then so what we've done is we've tracked it. It was 37 cents for fuel surcharge, which is 37.4 cents per mile, all the way up to what was basically 54 cents a mile in February, right? And now we know March is a completely different animal, and I'll pull that information up in 3 weeks when we get all the data together. But you can see that, there's been an elevation in fuel. But let's look at the rates from April to February. Are we cost justifying fuel? Yeah, we have. Fuel has risen here, our rates have driven here. So that the delta, what's between them, is what we've put into our pockets. And myself, with a company truck like you, Russ and Mike, I've become accustomed to making more money with that truck, right? I've become accustomed to paying more money out to those that end up servicing the truck, right? And so the goal is we've taken advantage, and this isn't a dry van. It went from $259 last April to $309 this February. Reefer did almost the exact same thing. Reefers were actually skewed a little differently, not as hard, but from $293 up to $352 for the same period of time. So we are cost justifying our fuel. And the way that we look at that is, let's look at the month over month change. So this map specifically that drew out, I took the information from DAT and I took the fuel surcharge from DAT and I ran a month over month difference. So for instance, we're over here in April and we see that reefer month over month went up 18 cents for that month. And dry van ended up going up 10 cents for that month, but fuel surcharge only went up 1.8. So the delta between what fuel surcharge went up and our overall cent per mile divided by 5 would have been the difference. And the same thing here. So we didn't make as many gains the following month. So our dry van freight from the previous month went down 1 cent. Fuel still stabilized at a fuel surcharge, right? And dry van dropped down. It doesn't mean we lost money. We just didn't make as much as the next month. But guess what happened? The month after that, we made up for it. And the month after that, we still made more money than fuel surcharge. And the month after that, anybody want to guess? We still made more money. So we continue to outproduce fuel surcharge up until when? January coming into February. And that's really strange because this is the same thing that had happened last year is happening this year. Guys, it's like Groundhog's Day. This happens every year. Every year we wake up, we're like, oh my gosh, first quarter's here. Except this year, January and February are really good months. It's usually returns and some scatter freight. But things are still needing to get put on shelves and people, they only eat if we move it.
Honestly, we've always experienced, and I've always thought of it as January, February, that's our slow months as far as volume, and we didn't see it. I mean, I didn't. Anywhere I looked, there was plenty of freight, plenty of volume, every board, everywhere you look.
So tell me, if fuel was going up, and fuel did jump up in February, and we are in control of freight, Russ, why did the rates drop? Because we allowed it to. Freight gets moved when we move it at the rate we do. And unfortunately, it's such a large number. It's not like everybody's going to move it. But it moved consistently between contract freight and spot market freight as we covered the week before. So all I did was I took this same data and I aggregated it over a 2-month average. And what this is saying that statistically speaking, right, that we've got the blue, which is the average for the reefer, for dry van, and then the orange for reefer, and then the fuel exchange. So what you'll see is as these numbers come down, as our freight rates drop, we'll have the fuel surcharge increase. This is the exchange. And now this gets dangerous if we don't fix it. If in 4 or 5 months, when fuel continues to rise as through the seasons as it does, or stabilize where it's at and just, have a little fuel surcharge bump month over month, and our rates continue to drop as we move into prime season, and we did see that in 2008, by the way. We did see in December, I believe it was, when fuel started to go through the roof, and again in 2010, and rates dropped off. But we weren't recovering from a pandemic. We were supposed to be recovering, but
Yeah.
So this is the dangerous crossing point here. So if this line continues to grow as we cover this, and these two trends drop down, eventually we're going to lose everything we gained in here.
Yeah.
So if you're hauling freight, just continue to carry it the way you have. And the biggest thing is just relax and look at your habits. Mike was dead on. 90% of everything that is out there with fuel is controlled by you, and or your dispatcher in getting those rates.
And Christian, so the difference, like you said, between 2008, 2010 is volume. So I don't see those lines keeping, the price of freight continue on that trajectory.
Right.
Especially when we're coming into the, the summer months, and we're going to have a strong push all the way towards the holidays, just like we always do.
Yeah.
But there's a lot more freight than in that time period you're talking about. So
yeah,
I do see a balance coming.
Yeah, I do too. And we're going to recover from this. Flatbed's going to start popping off, which is automatically going to drive our rates, and we're going to have produce start to pop off.
That's already
We'll have
starting.
Tom will talk about cherries, and you'll talk about flowers out of Venezuela. Then melons will come in, and then we'll have potatoes and everything else. And meanwhile, Tom's moving boats and everything else along the same line.
Yeah.
But when those peak seasons happen, it shakes the market up, and those atoms start going crazy, and it expands the rate. And there's not enough trucks on the road. So if we would all just continue to push the rates, and know what you're worth. If you think a $900 rate's worse than the $1,200 rate, you're right, and you're hurting everybody else in the process. I can remember when I was dispatching. It was about a year and a half ago, and I was coming out of Louisiana trying to go into Montana, and I was on the phone. It was Coyote, and he's always in my corner. Evan Berna was always in my corner. He said, "Here, man, I'm locked in. What do you want to do?" And I said, "Hey, give me a second." We call the driver. Call back. He says, "I can't do that rate." I said, "Why?" He's like, "It's $900 cheaper now." I said, "We just agreed on the rate." He said, "Yes, but obviously I'm in a load, but I'm not locked in it." They had another offer from another carrier for $900, and ended up being $1,500 less by the time he asked me if I wanted the final take. I said, "No, I don't want it."
Yeah.
He's like, "But don't you need to get there?" "I don't need to get there that bad." No.
Yeah. I'll find something else.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's what we're dealing with today.
Ray,
Yeah.
Ray, what was the last price of fuel that you ended up buying?
It was
Price per
five.
gallon.
I want to say it was about 564 or something like that. No. I'm sorry, 508. 508. It was here in Texas.
Okay. So can you guys see the screen again?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, let's assume we're running 2,900 miles. And we brought this up a while ago, but I think it's interesting that we bring it up and see the difference now versus when it was $3 a gallon, right? If fuel cost is 505 and we're running 5 miles the gallon, right? Here's what our fuel cost is going to be on 2,900 miles. But if we look down and we're doing even 6.5 miles to the gallon, right? Now we're running $2,200 worth of fuel versus 29. So we're putting almost $700 in our pocket.
Yeah, so that's way more than I even thought. So I would, I'm telling
too.
guys $300 or $400, you can save, and that's you're going to save way more if you can get 1.5 miles to 2 miles a gallon more. If you can find,
Yeah.
1.5 miles to 2 miles more a gallon, then what are we at? The 6 to 8, $600 there.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, I'm telling you too.
I can tell you where you can get 3 of them. 1 to 2 with using DPF alternatives to wash out. And Joel just did it on his truck.
Yeah.
Then he had them do his over the weekend or Monday, Joel.
Yeah.
So you can find, just like Chris Beret said, you can find at least 1 mile per gallon right there. And it was inexpensive, the service he did, and they did a great job.
Yeah.
But so doing something like DPF alternatives on your truck to take care of the DPF, and then
I started
slowing it
Pittsburgh
down.
power test last week, like we talked about. So we'll give the feedback on the miles per gallon on that.
And then
I'm using that already too.
Yeah, and then slowing it down. So there's 2, on at minimum.
Yeah.
Yeah, your habits are going to be 20 cents a mile. So every 5 miles you drive, just take $1 out of your wallet, throw it out the window, and say, "Well, was it really worth it?" And when you get to the end of the trip and you got $150 out the window, you think, maybe this wasn't the best idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've really noticed that myself because I always drove like 70 the speed limit.
Yeah.
And here in the last week, 2 weeks, I've dropped it back to 64, 65 miles an hour. I used to fuel every day. Now I usually fuel every other day.
Yeah, it makes a difference, and it's common sense. I mean, it really does. And you know what? If you continue to do that, Jim, you're going to see it in your settlements, especially with the price of fuel these days. So
Yeah.
So
You can't even find APUs on the shelf anywhere either, not even used. Right now, I've been looking for a decent APU, and they're hard to find.
yeah, for your second truck, Ray, is that where you're trying?
Yeah, for the second truck. Yeah.
I know I got to get my. I've been running pots. I got an APU on my truck that's broke. That's an idiot decision on my part. But everywhere he's been, he's got to stay down for 3-4 days before they can get to it. I'm like,
It's hard to say.
Is it a Thermo King?
and there's
or
not
is it
one
a-
by his house that he can drop it off when he's home, man. So I'm like,
What is it, Mike? Is
it's
it
a Comfort Pro.
Oh, okay.
Comfort
Yeah,
Pro,
because
yeah.
if anybody has any one of you guys need work on a Thermo King, I have a guy here in San Antonio that's dirt cheap. He does the same work that the Thermo King would do for a quarter of the cost. So
Dang, he doesn't work on Comfort Pros.
he says he does, but not as
Not
much.
really.
He's very very well versed with the Thermo King, but the Comfort Pro he doesn't even like it. He doesn't even like that unit.
So real quick before we move on, I want to touch on weight because I didn't touch on weight, and I want to see if you guys noticed this because when I'm booking loads, I honestly, and I don't even when I was in my truck, and,
You don't look at weight.
I don't pay attention to the weight only because it seems like I can negotiate better on the higher
Wait.
weight loads on.
So before you go on, Mike, it's kind of funny because Tina, was it a while ago, but Tina builds all our loads during the day. And so when I book something, she said, and then she goes, Doty books something, and then you book something. I'm the complete opposite because I'm booking like Ray and guys that have been here for years. And so we're so accustomed to just looking by weight first. And so most of the stuff I book is light. It's not always. And, when a customer, like we've said before, when they order a truck, we should be expected to be able to haul 80,000 pounds equipment. But I do search by weight. Now, and she said, but not Doty. She goes, when Doty sends me stuff, it's like 42,000, 44,000 all the time.
And I did it with me too.
Drivers are complaining.
When I booked myself, when I was driving in my truck, I didn't. And maybe that explains why I had to put a new motor in it. But
And tires.
But in your defense, Mike, these trucks are made to pull that weight. It's okay.
Yes, they are.
Yeah, so are horses. It doesn't mean they're not tired at the end of the night, Russ.
Right.
Yeah.
You give them a
What I'm
break.
getting at, is what I've noticed directly is when I call on a light load, they are number one, they fly off, especially now. They're gone quick, and they seem to be gone at a much lower price than I'm willing to take. Or there's very little negotiation there, and it seems like, if all things being equal on, let's say, 1,000-mile load, or let's say a 500-mile load, or go 1,000 miles for $3,000, right?
Yeah.
And that load is 44,000 pounds, or you can get 2,500 for that same load. Everything else is the same, but it's 20,000 pounds. What's the better option?
That's a fine line. I got a bunch of drivers that'll tell you I'll take the light load for cheaper money.
Yeah,
it's less wear and tear on your truck. It's going to be less on
Yeah, I got
3/4 of a mile gallon, right?
Yeah, it's
so my thing is when you go back and when you really do the math, now fuel prices being as high as they are, but before, going back and doing the math, I'm like, okay, I got $500 more even if it costs you an extra $100 in fuel.
And you're right, because it's
another
$3.50. 1 mile per gallon at this fuel price is $350. So while wear and tear on the truck and brakes and tires are an added expense, so let's toss 18 cents a mile on there, right? I'd run somewhere about 20 cents a mile plus $350 a week, and that's going to be I think that'd be your melted.
Yeah.
And
Mike, honestly, as far as what you said, is it harder to I don't know. I think that could be just like in your thinking that, you know what I mean? Because
I've got my hand raised. I'd love to comment.
Okay, but I've been searching loads this way for years, and I've always searched by weight first. I move it around and I change things, But I've always looking at the light stuff first and calling on it. And I don't think I've ever thought in my head there's a difference between how they negotiate with me or I negotiate with them based on weight. I don't even bring it up that it's light. I mean, I want to know the weight, but yeah.
I don't either, but
yeah.
it seems like they've brought it up to me, it's a light load. I'm like,
so I'll tell you this: when we're
Ignore
selling, Mike, when I'm selling freight to you on the brokerage side, when I'm selling freight, I always start off, oh, it's light, it'll save you fuel every single time.
Yeah,
every time. I have the same money in it for my customer, whether it's light or not.
Right.
And I'll be honest, most guys don't kick it back that it's not that big of a deal. But when I'm booking trucks and they say, oh, it's only 30,000 pounds, I was like, well, cool, that's like 3 cents. So do you want 3 cents back now or later? Like, if there's not much of a difference, because the majority of the people we're talking to in these 3-letter brokerage houses are college kids, or they're people that have never driven a truck and had to fill one up, or know even where their what def is or where it goes. So I think it's important that you just continue to play your strong hand, which is, that might make a little bit of difference. So I'll give you $50.
Honestly,
and that's it.
Christian, that is exactly what I do. If it's a light load and they mention that to me, I'm like, that don't matter to us. Everybody orders that's 8. We got to be able to haul 80,000 pounds. But in reality, in my mind, I want the light load, and that's why I called you.
So the other trick is what I do is I go on DAT and I start the weight on the opposite end. I start it with a 45,000 pound loads, and not because I take it, but because a lot of lazy postings, they might be 30,000, but they post them out as 45.
I found that too.
So I call those first, and they say, oh, it's 45,000 pounds. Okay, this won't work, thanks. So, but you've got to be able to roto down, make 90 calls a day, right? Or 200 total, but 90 outbound, and call and say, okay, hey, what's this one paying? Blah, blah, blah. Okay, thank you very much. That's not going to work, and move on.
Yeah.
But you'll call a 45,000, say, it's 22,000 pounds. And no one else is calling on that because they're pulling the Russ Deaton rule of booking, which is the lightest freight with the highest cent per mile.
Yeah.
And so
try that.
Yeah.
That's
so
good.
maybe reverse the 45, but just be ready to get off the call quick, or just give them an insulting price and say, oh, you can't do it. Smile and make them feel good to get off the phone.
Without the intention of booking that, if it is actually 45.
Yes, unless you get $10 a mile, and then you take it and you're thinking, hey, I got you $9,000 extra for your fuel tank.
I really get into, and I want to say something, Mike, about a load. You and I, there's many drivers we've booked together over time, but a week or so ago, I think it was last week, you had something going on with the bait shop, so I jumped in, and you were actually looking too. And I booked one of our guys, and I can't tell you the lane, but I remember you had booked someone else in the lane, and I got something that was pretty good. It was substantially better. I think it was Louisiana to up here somewhere. And,
it was.
And you asked me, and I booked him quick too, and you asked me, where did you find that at? And I told him DAT, and he said, wow, I didn't see it. The reason I didn't get to tell you because we were busy, but the reason I found that was because I wasn't seeing the rates I wanted under searching the newest loads. So I switched to searching for the loads that were posted in old.
9 hours old.
That was 34 hours old. Nobody was calling on that. And if they were, if you see that, you're expecting they left it on there, it got reposted, it's been long gone, right? It was 34 hours old. It was exactly what I was looking for, so I called them, and it was still there, and they needed a truck. So that's how there's always other ways to do it, but that's one of my kind of things in the past I'd go to is if I'm not finding, if I'm just pounding my head against the phone, I'm going to switch it up and maybe start calling old loads, and you might have to make more calls, but you might find something. And that honestly, I didn't make more calls. That was like 2 calls, and one was gone and that one wasn't. But no, they're not getting calls on that load.
Yeah, and see what I'll do too is I'll try to compare the people, the good ones we work with. You know, I'll look at what they have coming out of a area where I have the truck, and then I'll hop over to DAT and look at their rates to see how they're comparing. Before I'm making calls or going.
Yeah.
And if they're in the ballpark, obviously I go with the ones we work with all the time, because it really helps out. That just the Tonu alone for Matt over at CH, he gave me 250, where most people is 150, and then that mess up, and I will give him kudos here, because that Dala went to deliver a load, correct address, everything was on the BOLs, went there, they said no, it's got to go over to Jersey. It was like 200 miles or 150 miles, but it was going into Jersey, and they wanted to the customer wanted to give Matt like 450. I was like, no way, $1,000. And he said, you know, I understand. I'll get you the $1,000 even if I got to come out of pocket for it.
And he did.
He did. Not only did he, but we went to deliver in Jersey and they wouldn't take them. We had to take it all the way back to
close to Ohio.
No. It was just about 100 miles back to Pennsylvania.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it wasn't far. It was just 100 miles back towards the original delivery, but just a different spot.
And didn't he pay more?
Yeah, long story short, that little mess up, I think he ended up giving me like $1,900 more, and he sent the revised rate con without me even having to ask on a Saturday.
Yeah.
You know?
And Mike, there's something to be said. You just mentioned it. There's something to be said for, and Christian, you know, when you've got partnerships like, I know Christian, you know, you guys work very closely with Megacorp. We do too. Probably not as close as you guys, but
Meadowlark is the #1 carrier for them 3 years in a row. This will be the fourth. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we have those same relationships with several people, and that's why I've always said, Mike, I told you a long time ago, man, I lean on these people that we know if we get in a jam, they're going to take care of us. And so it is. I like seeing what they got and then comparing it to people that we don't work with on a regular, because if it's a small amount if it's change, I'm taking, it might be a little bit less, but I'm taking like the CH load or the load from Berkey or, you know, like a Megacorp load. I know they're going to take care of us at the end of the day if we have a jam.
And it's the other way around too, because when you take one, right, and Amy did, when I first asked, the first time he took a load, said, you know, can I trust him? I said, same as our fleet, exactly the same.
Yeah.
You know, and they're not gonna beat you up over a couple $100. And if you don't have it, if you ever find you see a lane you need and you're not there, just, you know, we just call them and let them know, hey, can we get here?
Yeah.
And a lot of times they'll say, yeah, you do enough work, let's get it done.
Yeah. So, and I know you think like that, Mike. And it's like in that situation, man, that really $1,900 on a, you know, $200-300 mess up, and he was right there and took care of us.
That's great.
Yeah, I don't know if it came out to 19, but it was 1,000 a Jersey. I think it was 450. He got me back, and then I think he got me like some detention and layover. So yeah, he took care of me. Like I said, I got the revised rate con on a Saturday without even having to ask.
And we had the same rep there, I will say. And I know you've probably dealt with her too, Christian, but we had the same rep there for the last 12 years, and then she finally went to go do something else, and we were like, oh man, because we had such a good relationship. And then this new guy, Matt, he's actually been fantastic, I think.
He has been for me. I mean, he has, because what I'll do too is I'll be on at like 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night looking at the boards and stuff. Mm-hmm. And what I'll do is I'll just, when I see some loads, I'll shoot him an email just so he sees it in the morning and can see if he can get to my rate. Yeah. And a lot of times he's hitting me back at night. So that's why if you're seeing loads coming through at 10 o'clock at night, that's why.
I do, yeah.
I do too.
So.
Well, wow, this has been a fun conversation. You know, I thought we were going to take a little time on fuel, and we went down booking loads and everything, but that's what it's about, talking trucking. Christian, thanks for bringing all that up with the kind of giving us a background of how the fuel surcharge, how to come up with it and all that. And Mike, for, you know, just reiterating that we got to slow down the truck. We got to do the things that we can do and we can control when fuel prices jump up on us. And like I said, guys, I'm not worried. And Christian said the same thing. He's not worried. The volume's there. It'll follow. I mean, I feel like we're already having a great year. I think it's going to continue. You might spend a little more in fuel, but you can do the things to help that. And the fuel surcharge at 77 cents this week. You know, make that work for you. So I know for my company drivers, it's going to work for me. So definitely.
Yep. Watch your areas. Don't get stuck like I did.
Yeah. So we don't make this about entertainment too much, but I will say the history of trucking we've been doing, I got a lot of calls about when we mentioned Jimmy Hoffa on the show and where's Jimmy Hoffa, and I think Kumar made a TikTok on it, and there were some comments on that, and it was funny. And then it kind of, we got to that period where, you know, the Teamsters and trucking and what goes along with it. And so we're going to take the rest of the show. Joel's got some information that he's going to go over about the trucking, the mobsters of New York, the 5 families. And then Kumar's got Vegas. I've got Cleveland. And
I've got nothing to do with this.
he's got no names, please. So
He's testifying.
Yeah. So we're just gonna have a little fun, and drivers.
No,
if
I'm
you're
not doing that either, for the record.
If you're listening, going down the road, I got some friends of ours that many that listen while they're driving. Sit back and relax, and we'll talk a little bit about the mob, and it's just for entertainment purposes only, and no names, please, except for usual.
Oh, well, except for Russ. All right. Well, what's up, guys? Welcome back to the trucking show that talks about sports, extortion, and
racketeering
shoes. I'm your host, Joel Howell, and I am going to be talking about the New York City mafioso today. But I want you to know before I start, if you couldn't tell, yes, I am from the South, and if I mispronounce any of these names or get this story wrong, please do not send a hit squad to Ohio. Russ made me do it. All right, without any further ado, here we go.
Your name looks like a mob name, Chalk Block. It just looks like a mob's name.
Yeah, like a
That's right.
Yeah,
He was the enforcer.
he's the
you
muscle.
gotta earn that. Everything's you gotta earn.
I gave him that name.
There's a reason behind that too.
Yeah.
Okay, so the New York City mafioso actually began way back in the 19th century, in the early 1800s. But for show purposes, we are going to fast forward ahead to the 1930s. And with that, the Five Families is the organization of the five major New York City organized crime families of the Italian-American mafioso, formed in 1931 by Salvatore Maranzano following his victory in the Castellamarese War. Originally known as the Maranzano, the Profaci, the Mangano, the Luciano, and the Gagliano families, over the next 3 decades, eventually evolved in what is known as the Bonanno, the Colombo, the Gambino, the Genovese, and the Lucchese crime families, respectively. Each family had or has territories of the 5 New York City boroughs and a rank structure with a hierarchy to report to. Salvatore Maranzano intended on being the capo di Tito di Capo, or the boss of bosses. Sorry about that, guys. No hit squads, please. Until he was assassinated in September of 1931 on orders of one Charles Lucky Luciano, thus forming the commission. Luciano himself would go on to be chairman. The commission consisted of bosses from the 5 families of New York, the Chicago outfit, and the Buffalo crime families. As I stated, Luciano was the chairman, and they had a meeting every 5 years or when deemed necessary. Luciano ended up in prison in 1936 and was deported to Italy until in 1946 until his death in 1962. That following year, in 1963, at the Valachi hearings, one Joe Valachi, a member of the Genovese crime family turned informant, testified before the Congressional Committee on Organized Crime. After getting pinched for a petty drug bust, he got busted for heroin. He gave up everyone. They didn't get to him, though. He ended up dying in federal prison in 1971, but the commission wasn't the same. He gave away all their secrets. But it gave notoriety to the 5 families, and since that time, they were never changed again. They're still known as the Bonanno, Colombo, Gambino, Genovese, and Lucchese crime families till this day. Words like associate, boss, capo, cement shoes, clip, whack, hit, pop, burn, ice, crew, Don, earner, forget about it. Heavy, bugged, packed, and oath, which is the omerta, which is a vow which went along to being made, which was a ceremony of promotion to a level that could only be achieved by Italian heritage only. They have to trace it back to the old school, to the Italy, Sicily region of the Mediterranean, and they had to have a vote. So amongst themselves, they voted. Other words, RICO, or Racketeer Influenced and Corruption Organization Act, which was passed in 1970 to aid the FBI in convicting organized crime members.
So just let me ask you this, Joel. So if you were made, you had to be Italian.
You had to be Italian, right?
Yes.
A lot of wise guys were affiliated, but they weren't full-blood Italian.
They were associates.
That's right.
Yeah.
And we'll get to that here in a
Got
minute.
it.
Other words, though, points, rat, sit down, tax, wise guy, contract, and on, entered the scenes all the way into the 1970s. In the 1970s, New York City family still maintained control of the hauling and trash industries, as well as the peer-related unions, longshoremen, and the fish market. The construction industry
Teamsters, too.
also closely aligned, and they all paid a street tax of some sort, which meant bad news for your local citizens as far as the cost of living was concerned. 1970s movie The Godfather was allowed to proceed as long as the term mafia and Cosa Nostra were left out. By the way, Cosa Nostra, the Italian term meaning our thing or this thing of ours.
I'm so glad you just said that. That makes me so comfortable.
You're welcome. And
I want to train horn that and just give him the definition.
and so Mr. One Joe Colombo, who was headed of the Italian American Civil Rights League at the time, was shot on June 28, 1971 during a hit called out by one crazy Joe Gallo. The shooter and his gang was killed in Colombo, was placed in a coma, and later died in 1978. He was in a coma for 8 years.
Wow.
Speaking of 1978, December brought the biggest heist in U.S. history at the time. It took place at JFK Airport. The Lucchesi, Gambino, and the Bonanno crime families were involved, and where they robbed a cash and jewelry truck worth about $6 million. It's about $21 million today, with inside help, of course. Moving into the 80s and 90s, top 10 businesses associated with the mob: garbage and waste. Number 9, gambling. Number 8, construction. Number 7, wind energy. Number 6, real estate. Number 5, food business. Number 4, bars. Number 3, porn. Number 2, music recordings. Number 1, drugs.
Pretty much everything.
Everything illegal.
All the fun stuff.
Anything under racketeering.
Big name bosses. Bonanno crime family, one Joe Bonanno, 1931 to 1968. Bonanno actually disappeared in 64 and reappeared in 66, only to die of a retire after a heart attack in 68. A lot of kooky stuff there. Some other names in Bonanno boss crime family: Natalia, Joe Diamonds, Ivala, Philip, Rusty, Rustelli, Salvador, Sally Fruits, Fargui, and Joey, Big Joe Messino. Over in the Colombo crime family, we got Joe Colombo, Carmine Persigo. That's who Sammy always talks about. Sammy Gravano's got a podcast.
Sammy the Bull.
Sammy the Bull.
Yeah.
He talks about Alfonso Alley Boy Persigo, Anthony Scarpardi, and Andrew Russo. Over in the Genovese crime family, we had Vino Genovese himself, Lucky Luciano, Philip Benny Squat Lombardo, Vincent the Chin Gigante. That guy was feared. He used to mumble words out in the street in his robe to throw the FBI thinking, to make him think he was crazy, but he wasn't. Over in the Lucchesi family, that's the family that was betrayed in Goodfellas. That was their crew. That was Giatano, Tommy Brown, Lucchesi.
Joel, it's Lucchese.
Lucchese.
Thank you.
Please.
He said that
Please.
like 10 times.
I
over. He's been
actually,
muted.
I actually personally
and
know.
Finally corrected me. Lucchese. I'm sorry, I didn't cut. Go ahead, Ian.
I actually personally know a Lucchese, so
Oh, my bad.
I can't say anymore.
All right, well, won't mispronounce that again.
They own the waste management company here in town.
Oh, great.
That's the reason
Carmine,
he's
Mr.
from New York.
Gribbs, Tremonti, Anthony, Tony Ducks, Corralo, and finally over in the Gambino crime family, we had Albert Anastasia, who headed the Murder Inc. That guy was murdered in a barber chair in the 50s. We have one Carlo Gambino, one Paul Castellano. I'll tell you a story about him in just a second. John Gotti and Frank Cali, who was murdered just in March of 2019. Gambino crime family. Associates, we have one Greg Scarpa, Roy DeMeo, Richard Kuklinski, Anthony Gaspipe Casso, Thomas Patera, Sammy the Bull Gravano, Mad Sam DeStefano, Harry Pittsburgh Phil Strauss, Joseph the Animal Barboza, and Abe Barella's Murder Inc. member. Those were all associates or underbosses and or hitmen, and they were all crazy except for Sammy. You got to listen to his podcast to understand. Michael Francis.
I have.
member.
Joel sent them to me, and I've been listening to for
really,
a while.
Really good stuff.
Really
if,
good.
If you get bored and want to listen to that kind of thing. And then finishing the story off, speaking of the Gambino crime family, on December 16, 1985, one John Gotti arranged a hit on then Gambino crime boss Paul Castellano outside of Sparks Steakhouse in Midtown Manhattan around the early evening in front of everybody. There were witnesses everywhere. Castellano and underboss Thomas Bellotti were ambushed, and that was the end of them. Gotti then took over the crime family until the FBI finally got to him. He was known as the Teflon Don. Sammy has a lot to do with that, him getting off on these charges, but he did get caught, and he did die in prison in 2002. That was back in the 90s, in the analog days. Since then, we've moved on to digital, and the guys can't really, well, they can't have a secret meeting anymore, but not the way it was. And that's where we are today. I guess not that I really know, but
Well, Kumar and I got something, Joel, too, and you mentioned the Genovese family, so we'll get into that in a second. But before we do,
don't kill me, Sammy.
Christian, you want to introduce your son?
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, Ben.
Of the Sneak
Benjamin.
crime family.
The Roanoke chapter.
Yeah, I have no idea what you're talking about. So you're going to come on. There's no questions with Kumar. Kumar got scared. Here you go. Hang on one second. I'd say he's a space cadet, but he's got an NASA sweatshirt on.
There you go.
Oh boy, Al Pacino was Cuban, not Italian.
Make yourself at home. So there's Russ. Remember Russ?
Yep.
What's up, Ben?
What's up?
Welcome to Talkin Truckin.
Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, can you grow a beard yet, like your dad?
I wish.
I wish.
No, you don't.
Yeah, we were gonna do Kumar this week. The questions with Kumar. You'll have to come back and do it again against him and see if you can beat him.
All right.
But we covered some other stuff this week. But are you gonna join the fishing contest this year? We're getting ready to kick that off this summer.
I might.
Your
I'll
brother
probably
won.
try to.
Yeah, do you fish with your brother?
Yeah, most of
Yeah.
the time, yeah.
You should join the contest. He won last year. Or I think you went with him when he went and spent his money.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I did.
that's cool. Yeah.
I'll have to try and join it. So.
Yeah. Well, it's good to have you on the show, making your Talkin Truckin debut, and
Yep.
we appreciate it. So, do you know anything about the mob?
From what my dad's told me, somewhat, but not much.
Oh, he's got stories.
He's got secrets.
Yep.
All right, Ben. Well, thanks, man. We appreciate you coming on, and it's good to meet you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Okay. All right, we'll talk to you.
See you later.
See ya. So, Joel and the 5 families.
Didn't do it.
Now we know Christian's.
I am not wearing a
now
wire.
now Ben let us know.
What
Christian,
happened?
Ben let us know you got stories down there. The families of Roanoke.
What'd you say, man? This is recorded, bud.
Yeah, we'll find out.
Yeah.
So, can you throw up that slideshow for me, Kumar? I'm going to name a couple. So, this is in the 1940s.
There's a new truck.
One of the Teamsters trucks right here in Cleveland. Cab over. During that time, here's some notable mobsters that came from the Genovese family that ended up in Cleveland.
That's where the Browns got their helmet.
That is Shondura Burns. I'll go into him in a little bit. Danny Green, the Irishman. That is Joe Leonardo, Cleveland's first mob boss. So the Mayfield Road mob, this is where the Leonardos and the Pirellos, there was 4 Leonardo brothers in like 1909 that moved to the Cleveland area from Sicily. So there were 7 Pirello brothers, and they worked together in the early years, but then this is where Vincenzo Pirelli was killed in 1930. Had something to do with the Sugar Wars, which I'll tell you about in a second. That is John Scalish, pictured during a wedding in 1930s. He was Cleveland's longest-serving mob boss.
Looks like the kid from Sopranos a whole lot.
Yeah.
This is Shondura Burns. I mentioned him in the beginning. Shondura Burns was public enemy number 1 in 1963 in Cleveland. Reuben Sternman. I'm not sure what the nose thing is for, but he was a pretty bad dude. And Danny Green, the Irishman.
I got a question, Russ. You were talking about the Irishman, the show, the movie.
Yeah.
Which one is it? Because there's 2. One of them's like 3 hours long, and the other's like 2.5 hours.
Probably the shorter one. I saw it a few years ago. It's mainly about Danny Green. It's To Kill. Mike, isn't it To Kill the Irishman? Isn't that the name of the one, the newer one?
It's To Kill the Irishman.
Yeah, that's the newer one. So this is James. How do you say it? Licavelli. I thought you knew him, Zach.
No, I know the other one. This is Lycavoli.
Lycavoli. These are all Cleveland
Gabagoo
mob bosses. Angelo Leonardo is the son of the original mob boss here in Cleveland. Angelo just died, I think, in like 2000s, maybe 2005. I might be wrong on that, but it's somewhere around there. At 95 years old, he ended up becoming. He's the one that killed. So the 2 families, the Leonardos and the Pirellos. They were working together in their turn of the century in the Prohibition days. They were importing sugar to make alcohol, and they were basically setting up franchises around Ohio, and they were providing all the sugar to make the alcohol, and they had a monopoly on it. But then the Pirellos took out Angelo's dad, and he held a grudge and ended up taking out the guy that, and some of the other Pirello family. He took out their people, and then he ended up disappearing for a while and turned state's witness, I guess, and then finally came out of hiding in the later stages of his life, the last few years, and gave some interviews and stuff. I guess everybody was dead, so he came back out, told his story. And then Jackie Presser was the Teamsters boss, so truck drivers in this area that were part of the Teamsters, which all the regional guys were, local guys. His dad was a Teamster boss, and so was he. And there's one more.
That's all.
Oh, that's it. Okay, so let's go back to Shondura Burns. On the corner of West 25th Street and Detroit Avenue in Cleveland's west side, a Lincoln Continental parked outside Christie's Tavern, a seedy bar frequented by Cleveland's mob bosses. The year is 1975. Blown to pieces by a car bomb, the bomb was so violent it shook St. Malachi's Church across the street. The blast killed infamous gangster Shondura Burns, 69 years old. A dramatic ending for Burns, although not unexpected in the city soon to be known as Bomb City, USA. Welcome to Cleveland. This vicious mob war resulted in 37 bombings in 1976 to 77 alone. And then Danny Green. Danny Green, born in Cleveland in 1933, grew up in a Catholic orphanage and held his Irish roots close with great pride. Dropped out of high school, joined the Marine Corps, where he learned to box and became an expert marksman. Tough as nails and full of charisma, Green earned the reputation of a fearsome presence. Working on the docks of Lake Erie, Danny was appointed the president of the local union in Cleveland. Green met Jimmy Hoffa in the early 60s. After a meeting, Hoffa remarked to Babe Triscario, stay away from that guy. There's something wrong with him. In 1964, federal grand jury indicted him for embezzling money from the union, which he ran. This ended his legal union leadership days. He then joined the solid waste trade union and started his own racketeering. That's where Green met Jewish mafioso Shondura Burns, the one I mentioned that got blown up on the corner of West 25th in Detroit in 1975. These guys became friends. Burns hired Green to settle disputes over mafia territories and to collect loans. Green was also tangled up with the Italian mob through John Nardi and was used as an enforcer until he started competing with the Italians for primacy over the Cleveland crime machine. Green picked up the predication for using bombs, and that was the favorite weapon of the mob in the 70s. Green, better known as the Irishman, escaped death on 4 separate occasions, including bombs that destroyed his home and his office. Shondura and Danny's relationship became strained over a loan that Shondura arranged for Green from the Genovese family in New York. Reportedly, a courier went to retrieve the money and was arrested. Using the money for a drug deal. So they didn't use PayPal or Cash App back then to send money or receive money. They used couriers. But the courier got up there in New York and decided he was going to try and make some money with the money before he brought it back to Danny Green, and he got busted, and the money never made it back to Cleveland, and they were still holding Danny Green accountable for paying it back, and he wasn't having it. Although Burns still held him liable, some believe this led to the car bomb that killed Burns on the corner of West 25th and Detroit and Cleveland. That began an all-out war between the Irishmen and the Italians. By 1977, bombings in Cleveland became a regular occurrence. There were 21 bombs in 76 alone in Cleveland due to the mafia wars, territory disputes, revenge killings, assassinations of mob leaders, and it was all because of the Danny Green. Officials estimated he was involved in 75 to 80% of the bombings in Cleveland. October 6, 1977, mob bosses tapped Green's phones and found out he was at a dentist appointment in Lyndhurst, which is right outside of the east side of Cleveland. 2 hitmen welded a bomb to his car, his Chevy Nova, while he was at the appointment. After they saw Danny Green climb into his car, they detonated it remotely, killing the Irishman. It was the end of the mobster who kept Cleveland on the edge for a decade by tearing it apart with bombs. So I thought that was really fascinating. The Danny Green, the Shondura Burns era here in Cleveland. I'd heard about it through people older than me. But
so
yeah.
I don't need to watch the movie anymore since you just alerted that.
I don't think, that wasn't from the movie. I think the movie's more fictitious. So yeah, you know Danny died, but yeah. So anyway, that's the mob here in Cleveland.
That's a lot.
Yeah, and take us out, Kumar, with the mob in Vegas.
All right, mob in Vegas. So it's almost kind of like I guess the mob in Vegas, they go together so well. It's the history of Vegas. So it's kind of a history of Vegas, with the mob in it. But in the early 20th century, Las Vegas started as a water stop, and it was a stop for wagons and later trains to stop and get water on the trail between Los Angeles and points east of it. In 1931, construction of the Hoover Dam caused the population to go from 5,000 to 25,000. And most of these were newcomers who were men, and they had no attachments, and they were all basically looking for work on the Hoover Dam. This caused the development for a market of large-scale entertainment consisting of casinos and showgirl theaters. So in the early 1940s, Bugsy Siegel, he arrived in Vegas, and he was first financially backed by Meyer Lansky, who was an East Coast gangster, and in Vegas, Siegel ended up dominating the race wire dissemination services, basically where they would wire horse race results to Vegas, and they would bet in Vegas. Then, because of his success in that, he decided to move on to gambling. And
so that's like the beginning of DraftKings, then.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah,
that was gambling.
Yeah,
yeah, and they just made gambling legal in Vegas, so he ended up taking over the El Cortez, or I guess that's redundant, taking over El Cortez, downtown Las Vegas, and the Strip. In 1946, Lansky started investing in casinos and chose Siegel to manage and construct the construction process of the Flamingo. This was the Valley's first casino and swank hotel resort. Because of mismanagement by Siegel, though, the Flamingo lost money quickly, and in January 1947, the Flamingo shut down, and the mob bosses ended up going after Siegel. But they ended up giving him a second chance, and they reopened the Flamingo in March of that year. But the profit was still insufficient, and Siegel was then killed in his Beverly Hills home June 20th, 1947. It seems to have happened pretty quickly, which surprises me. I mean, just within a year,
Yeah.
shuts down, opens back up, and then he gets killed. Also around this time, Alan Dorfman, who was a close associate of Teamster president Jimmy Hoffa and a known associate of the Chicago outfit, took over the Teamsters Central States Pension Fund, which began then lending money to Las Vegas casino owners and developers. They ended up giving funding to build the Sahara, the Sands, the Riviera, the Fremont, and the Tropicana. But over the next decade, most of the hotel casinos were connected to Lansky and his branch of organized crime. Under him, unlike Siegel, businesses were well managed and successful, which allowed them to launder lots of money and skim off the profits. By the 1960s, efforts were made to curb organized crime activity, like the Corporate Gaming Act, which licensed key investors and executives to own casinos rather than individual shareholders. But the mob was able to find ways around these efforts. By 1986, federal authorities had many mafia figures, and the mob had many mafia figures in custody, and the mob finally lost its grip on the Strip. So while I'm sure there's still some mob activity out there today, it's not as prominent, not as big of a problem, but it's safe to say that Las Vegas was built by the mob and the Teamsters.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, and guys, listen, it was just entertainment. It was fun. We were diving down like I said, a rabbit hole of the history of trucking, and then the Jimmy Hoffa question came up, and then I was that weekend. I was all over documentaries, watching stuff on the Teamsters and the trucking and the mob, and then they all ended up in Florida, didn't they, Mike?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they all, like everyone else, retired to Florida.
They retired to Florida, and it's no more. But yeah, it's still out there, for everything I saw and read. But we covered mostly the dead ones. So
hopefully,
yeah. But yeah, on that note, Christian, you got anything else?
I don't have anything else. No, I'm very disappointed we didn't do questions with Kumar. because I know Ben was just licking his lips and wanting a piece.
I
of that.
told him and invited him back that he can come back and we'll let him go against Kumar. So whenever you want to bring
He's
him
quiet,
back.
but he is smart. So Kumar,
Yeah.
do not underestimate him.
So
So
if
we're
he
just
can-
going to ask. We should say, you know, are you smarter than a sixth grader kind of thing? We should do something like that.
So even next week, if he wants to come back, we'll have him go against pitted against
nice
Kumar.
How many teams are in
And
the
I
Final
told him
Four?
that too.
Okay.
Yeah. But other than that, Mike, you got anything?
No, I don't.
Okay. Well, listen, guys, keep the shiny side up, slow it down a little bit, do the things that are in your control. And, if no one has anything else. Oh, Kumar does.
Yeah. Just like and subscribe and, follow all our pages, Talkin Truckin, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok.
And MySpace.
And MySpace,
Thought we were
of
still
course.
on there.
MySpace.
And
Thanks,
Zango.
Paul.
You guys got it, Zango.
Yeah. And if not,
Forget about it.
go Guardians, go Browns, and go Cavaliers. Playoffs, baby.